Welcome to the Thriving Life Podcast, a weekly podcast designed to help you thrive, not just survive challenges of life, leadership, and faith. My name is Nick. I'm the host back. It's good to be back after a couple-week period of self-imposed lockdown and isolation. I'm here today with Kenny Connolly. He is the next-gen pastor at Mission Community Church, as well as just sort of an all-around, in-demand guy, speaker, author, blogger, coach, consultant, wherever churches are leaning into the next generation. And today's topic, we're just going to dive right in because it's a huge one. Today's topic is roughly kids and technology.
Right.
This is something that we hear a lot, you and I. We get questions about this, our respective areas, and rightfully so. It's when I say it's a huge topic, it's because there's so many facets and nooks and crannies and different, from online bullying to depression and image issues to the predators and those horror stories that you hear about there. There's so many different parts of this conversation to have. So I'm hoping we can just sort of in this episode provide an overview, a good context for thinking about this. At the end of it, we're going to point you to some resources, some tangible stuff online on a new website that we set up where you can find some practical tools, but just also, to talk about what it's like to be a parent in this day and age, and hopefully touch on this topic in a way that affects every single one of those little areas. So with that, I guess I give you this gigantic beach ball and go, where do we begin talking about this, Kenny?
Right. It's really complicated and massive, but we only have about 30 minutes. Yeah. So this could be its own podcast where we just unpack resources,
totally.
Challenges, and things like that. But so if we have limited time, I think I'd want to prioritize just a couple things. Like initially, every parent wants more resources. Like what's the software, hardware that I need to be aware of to help keep my kids safe online? And which is great. And we're going to do that. We're going to share some of those resources. But I kind of almost want to take a step back too, because I think there's something bigger than just talking about the resources that we need as parents. Because I think that actually most parents they're doing a good job, or they're trying to do the best they can to keep their kids safe online. And most of them, I believe, they've kind of adopted the strategy of how do I limit what my kids are exposed to. Right. And so it's a strategy of limiting access, and which is good. But I don't think it's the most important. It is important, but I think there's actually something even bigger and more important to wrestle with. So there's a little bit of a philosophy and strategy conversation. Yeah. And maybe once we unpack that, then we can dive into specific resources that help with those aspects.
Yeah, and just, full disclosure, where we're coming from, we're both dads. Right. of I have 2 teenage boys. You have, 3 kids, 12 and under, right? And so we're in the middle of this as parents. But we're also, Kenny's sort of the next gen expert. I'm coming at this from the perspective of a technologist as well.
Right.
So we can provide some insight. But yesterday in our sort of prep conversation, we were talking about the 3 A's. You introduced this framework that you mentioned, these 3 A's, and I just loved the way that those 3 things can really synthesize this topic that applies to no matter what the issue is, no matter, like if you're just a parent going, hey, just give me a tool that I can fire and forget, or if you're somebody going, this is just brand new, like I'm tiptoeing into this world. The 3 A's are access, accountability, and attitude. So I'm going to tee you up to kind of introduce what those things are, and and then we'll go from there.
Well, and first I want to give credit where credit's due. I actually have a really good friend of mine. Her name is Erin. She's a family ministry leader in Kansas City. And when I was actually wrestling through some of these issues with a volunteer and their son in our ministry, she actually introduced me to the 3 A's, and I was like, this is amazing. Yeah. Like, this is amazing that she came up with this. So all the credit and kudos to her.
Shout out to Erin if you're listening.
In Kansas City. And also, in the same time, I have a 13-year-old son, 8-year-old daughter, and a 4-year-old daughter. And so the devices are alive in our house. And I would say that I knew this was coming. And I wasn't as prepared as I knew I should have been. Yeah. I actually had a Circle Go sitting on the shelf when it needed to be plugged in, and when it needed to be plugged in, it wasn't. And so
it doesn't do you much good when it's not plugged in.
No, and the person who's supposed to know this stuff was scrambling to correct and put those things in place. So that's why we're having this conversation. So the 3 A's, we talked about access, accountability, and attitude. Now, let's unpack maybe all three of these real quick. The first one is access, and that's the one that actually I think all parents kind of dive into first. Right. Of like, how do I limit access? I want to make sure that the internet that's coming into our house is filtered, is restricted. There's time limits associated with that, and so parents are always thinking of access. And there's a ton of great resources. There's resources that are amazing today that didn't exist 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Right. So I think we're living in a really great time with these resources. But there's a problem, because if you have teenage kids, I haven't experienced this yet, but you have teenage kids that a friend of mine shared this with me once, that the way that us as adults, and I think we're both Gen Xers, the way that we think when we see a piece of technology, we think of like, what will this do for me?
Right.
But our kids, they ask the question of, what will this do? And our kids are very creative, and they will figure out how to make the thing work. So all the work and the money that you spend on limiting access, your kids are going to figure out how to get around it. They're going to figure out how to unplug it, enter in a new VPN, something they downloaded, their friends told them, like, they're going to get past your limitations. So if your only strategy is limiting access, you're not going to win. Like, you're going to have this constant struggle with your kids. And so I kind of want to actually skip to the third A, because I feel like that's the one that really deals with this in this attitude. This attitude. And actually kind of define attitude is working with my will. So, because really when it comes to online safety, when it comes to adult content or whatever it may be, is like, there's a willpower issue. There's an attitude, and my approach as a kid, there's my approach towards this issue. Right. And for most teenagers and most kids, their attitudes stink. They just because they think that you just don't get it. Right. You don't understand. Like, all my friends have
my friends have it.
And so you're in this constant battle and this fight with your kids about, and you're just wanting to help protect them and those things. And so if you don't deal with the attitude, doesn't matter how much you limit their access. Right. Because as soon as they're out of your house, they're at a friend's house, or they're on their friend's phone, then they're going to experience the same issues. And so there's something about dealing with the attitude. The goal of the attitude is self-awareness, of helping kids, understand their limitations, to understand the dangers, to understand the role of you as a parent, of what you're trying to work with. And so the attitude's a big one. And so as a parent, of course your 8-year-old wants a cell phone. But should your 8-year-old have a cell phone? Probably not. Right. Or your kid wants Instagram, as an 11-year-old. Maybe that's not the right decision. Yeah. And so there's an attitude conversation of helping unpack and guide your kid through and navigating the challenges that they are going to face, that they're not even aware that are lurking around the corner. Right. Because it's not about your kids finding this stuff; it's about that stuff finding your kid.
I'm glad we started off with the attitude A, because one thing that I always when I talk to parents about this is, first of all, in this conversation, no matter where you are in the plane, I want to make sure parents know, like, there's a lot of grace for you as a parent too, because our generation of parents, us, is the first generation to wrestle with this issue specifically. I mean, since the beginning of time, parents and, kids, teenagers have been butting heads, going, all my friends, have it, why can't I? And so there's some, some of that's just part of being a parent, and there's some ways to head off those conversations. But specifically with regards to this one, just the speed at which communication happens with these kids, the amount of information coming to them that can act as an amplifier. Like, there's so many things about this time that go, there's not a whole lot of books out there, and actually we are going to point to some books, but those books have been written within the last 5 years. Right. There's not generations worth of knowledge. There's no common common practices that have been tried and true. We don't have our childhoods to look back to and go, well, my parents did this with me, so we're writing this script in a lot of ways. And I think that's actually a great conversation to have with your kids, depending on how old they are, as long as they're able to understand it. But for me, having that conversation with my kids, going, hey, I'm doing some hip fire accuracy here. I have no idea if this is the right move. So, just like you've never been this age before. And so we're going to figure this out together. And all I can do is go off of the best information that I have available to me and what God's given me. And there's just, so parents out there, if you're feeling overwhelmed by this, I want to encourage you, you're the one of the first of your kind, to wrestle with this. And part of wrestling is failing and picking yourself back up and learning about that and celebrating the wins,
And actually, I believe that failure is part of the process.
Yeah.
Your kids are going to mess up. They're going to fail. They're going to push against your boundaries, and they're going to circumvent your boundaries, and there's going to be a reckoning.
Yeah.
This is part of the process. Like, it's not going to be clean and easy,
Right.
because this challenge, this situation is not easy. And you said something a second ago about, having this conversation with your kids and having the right time. I actually think that most parents are having this conversation, if they're having this conversation, way too late. There's actually a really great resource that I share with a lot of people. It comes from an organization called Protect Young Minds, and they have a book called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures, and they have a version that's for elementary age kids, and they have one for preschoolers. And it's a picture-based book of helping prepare your kids for the day that they see adult content for the first time. Because usually, like, play this out, like most of us watching, like, we remember the first time and what played out in our mind. And for most of us, it was because there was no previous conversation that we went exactly the direction that content is designed to do.
Right.
But there's an opportunity, and this is an attitude piece of this, a strategy of helping your kids understand that the second they see that kind of content, that something happens in their brain where they associate that's a bad picture.
Right.
Like, there's something, this is not good for me, this is not good for them, this is not good for our society. So when they see that, it's a different response to them, and it can, and so there's a lot of great resources. And I know a lot of parents say, like, but how? Like, I don't want to steal, the innocence from my child.
Right.
There's a balance in there. There's a balance of beginning to have healthy conversations with your kids, and waiting for them all of a sudden for this. You do a search history and you find out that your kid's been seeing stuff that they can never unsee.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the attitude conversation. And here's another thing that. This is kind of an enlightenment issue for me over the last several months, as I've been spending a lot of time researching these things. This isn't a one-time conversation. And I actually believe, and I know for all of us parents, like, we dread the talk, and because it should never have been a talk. It should be hundreds of little talks.
Right.
But I actually have this new idea and this new thought is that the porn talk is the new sex talk. That this is actually a conversation that we probably need to have with our kids, within the right boundaries, the right context, long before we're talking about procreation and those things, of preparing our kids, because this stuff is looking for them.
Well, yeah, and that's why, when we talk about access, and you had mentioned at the top of the podcast, a lot of parents, our instinct is just protect and just go shut it down. You're not having anything. You're not going to be connected. I don't care if your friends have it. I'm going to regulate this, and you're not going to have anything until you turn 18. The problem with that is that's not the world that they're going to grow up in.
Right.
They're going to grow up, and if they have no access to internet or anything, by the time they turn 18, at some point in their adult life, they're going to become digital citizens. They are the digital generation.
Right.
And so if your strategy up to that point as a parent has been completely shelter, restrict, no conversation, put your head in the sand as what feels good from a parenting instinct, so to speak, you're going to have an 18-year-old ready to go into the world who doesn't know how to look out for that stuff, who doesn't know, even when they're being, scammed, or they get a phishing email, or some of the nuanced, social media, etiquette, things like that. Like, they're going to be completely young in that and not have those skills. And so that's an argument for having this conversation about attitude early on, and really helping train up smart, responsible, aware digital citizens.
Right. This is
in a way that doesn't cripple them.
This is no different from waiting till your kid turns 16 and handing them the keys to the car and say, "Go have a good time."
Yeah.
Like, you would never do that.
No.
You would never do that. But in the same way,
They would want you to do that.
Of course they would.
Having two teenagers, okay, I'm ready now. Let's
of course
go.
they would. But handing your kid a smartphone on Christmas morning when they're 14 is no different than handing them the keys to the car.
Yeah.
And they've never. And so there's a process of helping them develop a healthy attitude towards technology. towards like they need to have a season where they're learning how to operate, like of just being responsible of like there's text message I need to text my mom, when I've been gone for longer than 30 minutes. Like it's an attitude situation of learning how to be responsible. And as our kids, and this we'll kind of get to this earlier because again, parents oftentimes their priority is on limiting access.
Right.
But when you actually focus on getting the attitude right, then that should expand access.
Yep.
Like at the beginning, we give them a little bit, and as we see a healthy attitude, we slowly give them access to more.
Right.
And give them access to more. So that way, by the time they're senior year of high school or whatever, maybe there's nothing that they don't have access to because over the years, they've shown us that they have a healthy attitude towards my parents know what's right for me.
Right.
They're trying to set me up for a win. I'm learning how to be like a good digital citizen. And there's a whole bunch of resources that we're going to share with you a little bit later about some specific resources around attitude. Those 2 books I told you about, the Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. There's actually Google created this amazing
I love this
website called Interland.
Interland. Yeah.
And along with it comes a parent curriculum, the family conversation guide and it's a fun game for like elementary age kids to play that they learn how to become good internet citizens. Everything from like understanding when you get an email that you don't know who it is, like don't give them your personal information, even though it looks like it's from legitimate. Like to teach them about how to keep your information safe and secret. How to treat other people equitably, and so those are all parts of the attitude conversation. There's so many resources we're going to share with you to help you deal with the attitude.
Yeah, and just a reminder, all of these resources, I guess I'll just go ahead and drop it right now a little bit. We've been working on this site just as a parent resource tool for mission parents and just parents in general, people in the community. It's called missionparents.org, and we're actually going to drop all of the resources that we mentioned plus more in this podcast on that site. So it should be live now.
Right.
The Interland thing, you showed me that yesterday. I'd never seen it before, and I went through it. It's so cool. It's so it's a gamified lesson for kids on some of the dangers, the pitfalls, some of the etiquette things with regards to the internet, what to look out for, and it's for younger kids too. It's not something you'd sit down and show your teenager.
No.
And hearing it's a beautiful site from a web designer perspective. I was like, this is a gorgeous looking site. So that's a Google thing. If you just Google Interland, I think
it's a Google ethos. It's like somebody probably spent their 20% time on building this with all the resources of Google.
So cool.
And it's really cool. So that's the attitude issue, and probably closely tied to attitude is the other A that we haven't talked about, which is accountability. And accountability this is tied into attitude, because I'm not giving my son or my daughter a phone without having complete access to all their passwords, to all their accounts. Like I'd be a terrible parent, if I didn't have that. And so that's accountability. Like there are no secret accounts. There are no secret apps. There are no, and you and I talked about this yesterday, because you talked about when your kids got phones, you had them sign a contract.
Yeah. So we had, with my firstborn, when he got his phone, I wrote out this huge contract. It was like the Magna Carta. With amendments and everything. And there's a section in there of, it's the death penalty for your phone. Like if you do any of these things,
it's gone.
Your phone's gone, and we don't even really talk about it. And among those things, like if you delete these apps, if you change the password, if you set up any social media accounts, and I'm not aware of those or I don't share those with you. So like there's a number of those things. And for him, that was some of this is about how your kids are wired too. As parents, all your kids are different, and so whereas one kid might respond to, hey, don't do that, and with the other one you might have to take more of a stern tone, and they're crushed or whatever. Your kids are different, so there's some parenting common sense that goes with this conversation. But with him, he's like I said, he's almost 18 now. He's had a phone for I don't know, probably 6 years, something like that, and that contract has come in handy. Like that language in our home is, if I want to spot check, Instagram or whatever, and I can't get into it, it's like he knows, like that's the death penalty. And, most of the time it's like, I don't have the password right or something. But I think having some written rules up front, for your kid, it seems like a no-brainer. Because like, yeah, I'll sign whatever, paper. But, sitting down and also having the life conversation, this is what a contract is. Right. This is a give and take. I'm giving you the ability to do this, and this is what you're giving me in return. And So I highly recommend drawing up a contract and having some values.
We have one on missionparents.org
Cool.
on the parent toolbox.
Yeah.
Now, this is the cool part about it. Your kids are going to like this because the contract goes both ways. There's a parent contract as well as a kid contract, because sometimes we're not very good with our phones either.
Well, isn't the parent contract just AT&T or T-Mobile?
No.
Like paying the bill? Oh, okay.
No, it's about us as parents being engaged with our kids' lives and not being glued to our screens either.
Yeah,
And so,
yeah,
and
I
your
like that.
Your teenager probably like they're going to feel a little bit more ownership in this contract of like if you are accountable too. Because how many times have your kids thrown that back of like, well, you're on your screen.
I'll tell you what. Wait till you have a kid who's about to be a driver, and they're riding in the car with you. Nothing will nip your looking at your phone while you're driving habits in the bud faster than a kid who's on the eve of driving,
Right.
and they're watching you, and then just being aware of going, I don't want their phone anywhere near their car when they're going, So,
Right.
yeah, it works both ways for sure.
Yeah, so accountability is a big deal. And so accountability comes with attitude of like, you need access to your kids. And you know what? It is not a democracy. It is not like there aren't freedom of rights with your kids, of right to privacy. Not yet. Like this is something that they need to earn, and they need to, like you won't have their passwords forever.
Right.
But right now, your kids, their frontal lobe has not fully developed yet.
Right.
They are making decisions that they can't see beyond 6 days or 6 months or 6 weeks.
Right.
And so at this season of their life, they need a coach. They need somebody. And so when you create this kind of accountability, then and they thrive under that, and they begin making good decisions, and they tell you when things didn't go right or whatnot, then you're in trust, and you end up giving them more access.
Love it. I actually would like to take a time out because we've been talking a lot about the kids with the phones and what they get, and sort of this conversation leading up to access. It's important to know too, as a parent, there's a lot of tools that exist nowadays for you as a parent that didn't exist previously that help you do your job as a parent.
Right.
One that we use in our house, having teenage driver and having another one who's going to be a driver soon, who's super active, is Life 360.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tracker. You can pay for an upgrade and get a weekly driver report. You can put a geofence around locations so you can see when your kids come and go. And that's not to be Big Brother. That's just like a safety thing. When I was in high school, I had an 81 Volkswagen Rabbit diesel engine car, like top speed 45 miles an hour, and it broke down on the side of the road, and it was in the middle of nowhere. And I just look back at the time and I go, how did we survive that?
Right.
Nowadays as a parent, I'd be mortified to think about my son broke down on the side of the road without a way to contact. I got through it, and granted there's some of that, those are the good old days, and
Right.
there's some life lessons learned there, but it is sort of a safety thing. It's a good tool. It's one of the things that we mentioned in the toolbox. And funny story about Life. I don't know if you know this or not. With Life 360, my son told me there's a movement in the teenager world to try to get this app kicked out of the App Store. there's this teenage kid somewhere in the country who started this campaign that's going viral and is having all these teenagers go to the App Store, give it a 1-star rating. And his thing is, if an app gets below a 1-star rating in the App Store has to, by their policies, has to pull the app and review it. And so he's
Right.
like, come on, guys, let's get this app driven down. So if you go on, you'll see it's got really low ratings. It's not quite at 1 yet. I think it's like 3 or 2.5 or something.
So that is
Those
the
are
best
all-
advertisement right there.
That's the best advertisement
Right.
for Life 360. I mean, it's all just teenagers trying to get kicked out of the App Store because, mom and dad are watching me.
Right. And so that's a great accountability app. So
Yep.
like, if your son speeds,
Yep.
you're going to get an alert. If there's massive deceleration, like an indication of
Hard-braking,
an
yeah.
accident, then you're going to get a message. So it's just, there's some things that just are going to give all of us peace of mind. If your son's supposed to be at school, but then you see that, you get an alert that he's at In-N-Out.
Which has happened several times.
Right.
And it's like, Dad, I'm on a field trip. I told you about this. Like, okay, good. I'm not
Right.
calling the cops.
So that's accountability, and it's again, it's one of those things. But here's the deal: Life 360 isn't just for your kids either.
Yeah.
Like you can share it with your you can. I've heard people talk about that people will geofence the grocery store. So anytime somebody from the family is at the grocery store, everyone gets an alert, like, get the milk.
Don't forget to pick up eggs.
Pick up eggs.
I love that.
Toilet paper.
Yeah, we do
So it's not just for kids, but it's also a way, like, my wife and I both use Find My iPhone all the time to find out, like, where are you? You know, and it's like, okay, she's at Walmart, or she's at, you know, wherever it may be. So that's normal. There's another accountability app that was actually, they've just made a core update just a few weeks ago that actually makes it a great accessibility app too. And and you've probably seen it online. It's called Bark. A friend of mine's works with them and for them, and he's always supplied a lot of this information. Because here's the deal: policing your kids' social activity, their email, their all those things, literally it would be a full-time job for you. And so there's no way. And if your kid is going to delete emails or text messages when they come in, like, you'll never see it. Like, you will spend all your time doing this. And this service Bark that just came out, it uses AI to, when you sign up, you sign up your kids' social, you connect your kids' social media to this Bark service or whatever, and then what it does, it has an algorithm that runs through, and it looks at their social media, it looks at the social media that's direct messages that are sent to them, and it will alert you as a parent when it sees something that maybe indicates self-harm, indicates bullying, that indicates inappropriate, you know, sexual behavior or whatever it may be. And already Bark's been out for like 3 or 4 years. It's actually already been attributed to, I think, stopping like 20 school shootings.
Wow.
Because they give it away to schools for free.
Yeah.
And so it's a great way that you can, again, I think parents still need to occasionally swipe the phone and scan through it and look through it, but to give you peace of mind that that somebody else is also looking, and there's not like some nerd in Houston that's scanning through your messages. It's just they're looking for keywords and phrases that are helping you alert you as a parent that, like, something was just said to your child. You know, it's 2 a.m. Something was just said to your child that indicates bullying or indicates a sexual advance or whatever it may be. And you as a parent, and then what it does, it actually gives you resources to help you have a conversation with the kid about that situation, which is amazing.
Yeah, because that's the kind of stuff that happens. That's everybody's worst fear.
Right.
That you always, I feel like you hear the stories about parents that didn't realize that stuff was going on, the bullying, the inappropriate contact, until it's too late.
Right.
Or until some, irreparable harm's been done. And so what an incredible resource that is. All right, so we have attitude plus accountability.
And I would even say right before we get to this last one too, is that, but even that doesn't stop the need for beginning to have very open dialogue
100%.
about this thing. Because one of the things is, like, the things that Bark will never see will be how your daughter was not included in a social media feed with all her friends. Or because again, kids can be really creative of how terrible they can be to each other.
This is why having conversation with your kids, especially as they get to be older, they're teenagers, and it just feels like they're pushing away. But just knowing what's going on in their life, having open dialogue with them, having a conversation, earning their trust to not, overreact, but to be somebody that they can talk to is so important. I actually have friends who navigated that exact situation. They had a daughter who was intentionally being excluded from school. Or from a friend group, and friends were intentionally posting on social media stuff without her in it as a way of, like, it's not direct bullying, like you can't point to that and be like, look, they're being mean to her.
But they were.
But they absolutely were intentionally excluding her just to get back at her for something.
Right.
And if they didn't have the kind of relationship with their daughter where she could feel comfortable talking to them about what was bothering her, what was going on, what was bringing her down, that's the kind of stuff that just compounds and compounds and compounds. That you're right, no app can track that.
Right.
No app like I guess the app to your to your kid's heart is you.
Right.
That's what that's why God has you in their life. So,
and that's why
absolutely.
That's why all of this isn't a one-time conversation. It's probably a weekly conversation. Like, hey, what did a friend of mine talks about, like, have conversations like, what's the craziest thing that you saw this week online? Or what's the craziest thing what's the funniest thing? But beginning to have an open dialogue with your kids about what they're experiencing online. And the more often you have these conversations, the more likely they'll be to say, like, yeah, something really crappy happened this week.
Which is why, going to Access now, attitude plus accountability will determine the amount of access you have. When we have this conversation, a lot of the questions that we get are, okay, like, what's the tool? What's the thing that I can just cut access? And that's why it's important. I'm glad you flipped the conversation around.
Right.
Because all that other stuff, the conversation, the accountability, like, all of those things should happen first. And I think if you're doing all of that stuff well, if you have the open communicative relationship with your kids, you've worked with them on attitude, you've put things in place to achieve accountability, access is it's just a safety net. Like it's a moot point. If anything, it's an easier way of when they get in trouble, like grounding them from your phone instead of like take the phone, like you know, these different tools that you can use to limit access or whatever. But access almost, when you approach the conversation, feels like the biggest, most important thing, just, you know, transactional, give me the tool that I need and show me how to install it. But once we get through all of this, you realize it's kind of not. But that being said, we do have access to talk about.
Yeah. There's so much that exists today, and there's some old school ways of doing these things. You were telling me not too long about somebody in your small group who had a really creative way of limiting access.
Yeah, I don't know if I have permission to share this story or not, but they showed up to small group one night with a cable modem under their arm, and we're like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "Well, you know, our kids, like you said, they're crafty. They find ways around it." And so he you know, changed the password on the wireless router and all this other stuff, and their, you know, games, you know, weren't working, and they figured out how to just go straight to the modem. Right. And so they went to the modem, we're plugging in. So he's like, "I'm just ripping the modem out of the wall and taking your phones," and we shut it down. Kids are crafty. There are some old school ways. I have another friend who had just heard their kids were fighting over the Xbox, so he took it out and threw it in the swimming pool. I mean, that's a little too costly for my blood,
right.
but
right.
You know, a lot of people don't realize. I will say from a technology standpoint, a lot of people don't realize if your kids have iPhones. I'm not as familiar with Android, but if your kids have iPhones, a lot of the new screen time features that they put in, if your kids' phones are shared on your family, a lot of the screen time features can essentially, you can with a couple clicks turn their phone into a brick. It doesn't do anything. You know, my kids, they're constantly pushing up against me about this, but we have screen time turned on, and at a certain time of night, their phone shuts off, and there's only a couple apps that are allowed to be used while they're, you know, while screen time's kicked on, like the Bible app, their, you know, iTunes if they want to listen to music while they're falling asleep, whatever. So there are ways, you know, because I know one of the questions we got from a staff member was, you know, I know how to set restrictions on my Wi-Fi at home, but my kids just switch their data on their phone, and, you know, voila, they're around it.
Right.
Well, if you're paying the bill on their phone, and they're part of your family share plan, it's an iPhone, with screen time, you can shut a lot of that down. You still have a lot of control.
Right. There's the iPhone is actually really great. They have a lot of resources there as well.
They listen to parents. When they made those updates, they listened to parents.
Right. And I've here's the thing: is my kids are at the age where they're still a little bit more destructive than I'd like. So none of them have iPads yet.
Yeah.
So they're actually on Kindle Fires and Kindle. And as clunky as the Kindle Android installation is on these things, it works really well. And so, like, I can share a book that I've been reading with one of my kids. I can share, like, my son Titus is really into playing Zelda games, so I could share with him, like, one web page that has the walkthrough of the game that he's playing. Right. That's all he can access, and they're fantastic. And
that's
the great thing,
into the internet for him is that one Zelda page.
That is the only internet he gets, but it's loaded with games and books and music that are all age appropriate, that is pretty locked down. And the cool thing is you can download the Amazon Free Time app on your iPad. So if you're traveling or their battery runs low, you could give them your iPad and they can enter into their app and have access to all their things. And the great thing about what I love about the Kindle is that if they throw it in the pool, I can send it back to Amazon. They'll send me another one. So it's got an amazing replacement because it only costs like $70.
Yeah.
And but they're the kind of the go-to device that has become really popular the last couple of years is Circle. Mm-hmm. Circle was Circle Go. Circle originally was you plugged it into your router and it would it did a lot of internet filtering for you, but it also allowed you to set time limits on specific games, apps. You can pause the internet at dinner time, you know, all those things. And then they went, like most of the companies have, they've gone to now individual apps you install on individual phones. So that way when somebody goes out, their phone is still not free to go wherever they want. I'm using actually an app because I do have a couple iPads in the house that my kids use from time to time. I use an app called Our Pact. And so basically when my son or daughter open up the iPad, I might have 200 apps because I'm a little bit of a clutter bug. Mm-hmm. I might have 200 apps on my iPad, but when they're on it, they only see 3. You know, there's no browser.
Right.
You know, there's a game that they like to play. Or with my son who's doing a lot of homework right now,
Right.
so he's got access to Google Classroom and access to a calculator, and that's about all he's got. But Circle is a great go-to. I told you that Bark has recently gone to where you can filter and limit time as well. And there's another access, because here's the other side of it, that most of us probably have Netflix, we have Hulu, we've got Amazon Prime, we've got Disney Plus. Now we have more and more streaming access, and every single one of them handles restrictions differently.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit crazy. And so some people I know at Bark, they created a new resource. It's actually called the Barkomatic, and it's a separate website. We'll share it in this document, but it has a questionnaire that you just answer the questionnaire. It takes about maybe like 5 minutes to do. It asks you about who your internet provider is, what router you might have, what services you do, and then when you hit submit, then it sends you a separate PDF for every service or device that you have with instructions of how to apply restrictions.
Oh, that's cool.
So that way, like my kids can access Netflix, but they can't watch anything over PG without a 4-digit code. And that's the way it is on Hulu, and that's the way it is on the other ones. And I had to figure that out real quick because they can choose my profile on all those, and they can see access to all the things that I watch. But even for me, I can't watch those things without that code.
We get lots of questions about specific apps. Like, what do you think about Snapchat? What do you think about TikTok? And, we don't really have time to get into each one of those individually. But what I would say is, kind of not to be repeating myself, but a lot of that stuff we talked about with attitude and accountability comes into play at those conversations. Plus, knowing the maturity of your kid. To be honest with you, when the Snapchat conversation came up for my youngest son, we actually involved his older brother in the conversation, who had been part of the Snapchat world for a while, and we would have shared access, and anytime if we wanted to jump into that account, we could. But Snapchat's different. It dumps messages as soon as you get them. It is possible to have very secret conversations on Snapchat, so that's something to consider. Do your research if you feel comfortable with that as your parent. But he pushed for a solid year and a half before we felt it was okay for him to have Snapchat with some guidelines. So I would say with each of those apps, like, do your research, like you say, share email, share passwords with your kids so that they know that anytime you can drop in and have access to it and have conversations, but continue just to build that trust with them. And if after all of that, if you feel like their attitude's right, they've shown you they know how to use the internet, they've shown you to have an awareness about what some of the threats are that are out there, you feel like you can trust them, like you would be able to throw them the keys to the car, then I'd say, wade into those waters. The fact is, any tool can be used for harm.
Right. Yeah, because here's the funny part, is because when Snapchat came out, I remember on one of my blogs, I wrote, like, warning parents, like, this is a dangerous app, like warning or whatever. And then I remember about 2 years ago, I looked to see, like, what's the most dangerous app for teenagers today? It wasn't Snapchat. It wasn't Instagram. It was Google Docs. Mm-hmm. It was Google Docs. It was because
simple old Google Docs.
It was because because again, teenagers are asking the question, what can this do? Right. So what they're doing, they're all sitting in class on their school supplied Chromebooks, and they're all got their documents open, and they all, like, within the class, they all had a password protected document opened, and they're all chat, because how it works, you all chat at the same time. And so they're having bullying conversations, they're sharing adult content, all on password protected Google Docs. And so,
and from an access standpoint, if you're looking at a firewall, it just looks like, oh, good, Billy was on Google Docs. He must be working on a paper.
Right.
I'm so proud of him.
And again, another commercial, Bark searches Google Docs too. So it's like, are
you being paid by Bark?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Actually not.
Disclaimer, Kenny does not work for Bark.
I don't actually even have it yet, but we're getting ready to possibly move to, we use RPact. We're possibly going to move to Bark because it does the time limits and filtering as well. But that's why the conversation is key, because it's not that an app is evil. Mm-hmm. Some you look at, it's like, this was definitely created for mal purposes. Yeah. But it's not always about the app. It's the conversation of, how are you using this, or how are your friends using this, or because your kids are always going to be 2 or 3 steps ahead of you.
Right.
And that's why it's so important to have the conversation and the attitude with them to where you can trust them before they download TikTok or before they download Snapchat or whatever it may be, because you've earned some trust with them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, just as a final word of encouragement to you parents, again, you're not in this alone. We're all in this together, as
Right.
they say in High School Musical. And we're the first generation to do this. You're going to fail. Your kids are going to fail. Lots of grace, lots of trust. Those are the things that fill in these gaps. Be smart. If you're just looking about parenting through this by limiting access, I'd say that's probably the biggest danger
Right.
to approaching this topic. So we, like we promised, we have some resources. I think if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to have that link in the description and in the comments below. If you're listening to us, you can hop on YouTube to find that link. You can find it in the Mission app. We'll have it in the description of this media item as well. And you can just go on missionparents.org and find it. And we're going to share all these resources plus more. The doc that we have is awesome. It's a huge PDF, lots of resources, lots of setup instructions, just more tools than you can ever ask for, just to kind of point you in the right direction and get you started. So,
Right.
Thanks, Kenny, for hopping in and sharing your expertise. If you have any specific questions related to this stuff, or maybe you feel like, gosh, we've been doing this for years and we're seeing some major failures. There are times when this type of conversation ventures out of this conversation. It's beyond technology. It's in crisis mode, I think you'd say. We also have resources available for you. So reach out to the church. You can email us. You can visit missionaz.org to hop on there, contact us. We have resources for you as a family. We want to hear from you. What are your concerns? What are you struggling with? Anywhere from one-on-one counseling, therapy that we can point you in the right direction, to just more resources, maybe custom tailored to your specific needs. We just want to be a help for you and be a resource. So Kenny, thanks for joining us, and thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week.